Good evening, everybody. Hope you are all doing well. Today is January 14th of the year 2026, and I hope everybody's staying warm. It's quite cold here in Atlanta where I'm at, and it's going to get really, really cold tonight and heading into tomorrow. So I suspect most of the country is also going to be pretty cold. I am testing. I put in the comments. I'm testing a new microphone. If you don't hear me well, or if it doesn't sound as good as the old one, let me know. I can go back to a wired microphone. It's called a Shox, and it's basically like a bone conduction type of thing, and it's gotten great reviews, and it's easy to wear. So I'm testing it out. Just we'll see how it goes, and if it doesn't work, just let me know. That sounds good. Okay, thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. So we'll see. I'm going to listen to the playback and see how it sounds. But okay. As far as anything new, nothing really going on in the Social Security world that I'm aware of. I will tell you, I've had I had a bunch of hearings in December, November. I had no written decisions issued really for almost a month. I think yesterday I got two that were fortunately approvals, but there was about a month period where I got no written decisions. So I suspect there was a backlog in terms of getting the paperwork processed. I think there's also a backlog in terms of getting people paid. A lot of people on the listserv are talking about that. So if you are in pay status, you're waiting for your lump sum, then there's a delay there. So hopefully that will get taken care of soon. Nobody wants to wait to get paid. I haven't gotten paid on cases I've won, and again, I've got a bunch of cases that I think should be approved that have not been processed through. So we shall see what happens. Okay, let us go to some of the questions here. Kevin Johnson said he had a hearing that lasted less than 10 minutes. That's usually a very good sign. The judge had no questions of the vocational witness. He believes that he met the grid with an onset date, and basically, the grid basically means that if you go to gridrules.net, I've got a website discussing the grids. And basically, what the grids say is that when you hit age 50, and then again at age 55, um, even if you have some capacity for work, you are still considered disabled. So, for example, Grid Rule 202.06 says even if you can do light work is defined as standing and walking 6 hours in a day, lifting 20 pounds an occasion. Even if you can do that, you're considered disabled, assuming no transferable skills. And if you have pain, medication side effects, depression, that can get rid of those transferable skills. And I will tell you, I win a lot of cases on the grids. 202.06 in particular is a really strong one. One thing I've noticed recently is that a lot of the cases I'm trying now, at the time they were being processed, the look back was 15 years. Now it's 5 years. So I've got a lot of, what that means is that when Social Security looks at past relevant work, they are seeing, they basically only look at the 5 years prior to the hearing. So if we're in 2026, we go back to 2021. Well, number one, a lot of people, if they've been waiting for 2 or 3 years, haven't worked since 2020 or 2021. So they may be no past relevant work in the last 5 years, or the work they did was they were just having more and more trouble, and they got into doing very entry level, unskilled kind of work, which has no transferable skills. My point is that a lot of the decisions, the denials were issued at administrative, at recon, and initial when there was a 15-year look back. And so they were denied because they could do past relevant work. Well, now there is no past relevant work. It's been more than it's a 5-year look back. So we don't have to go through could they return to past work. All we have to prove is that there is no that they have no past relevant work and they're limited to light. And I've got a case coming up next week where the person was denied because of past relevant work. Now there is no past relevant work. We won on the grids. So it's just a really, really strong tool if you can fit into one of the grids. If you're over 55 in particular, even if you're over 50, that can help. But I'm winning a lot of cases on that. And I think just because the state agency is either the decision was so long ago that the past work was within the 5 years, or they're using the wrong number. They're using 15 instead of 5, and it gives me a real argument to go in and win pretty quickly. So anyway, Kevin basically says, he met the grids. At July 23 onset date, both SSDI and SSI. Um, didn't work while getting the SSI benefits. Um, Judge has a 58% approval rate, which is very, very good. The lawyer didn't have say anything, which is also a good thing. Um, and Shout out to Shub, 2 years, 6 months to get approved. Shub is one of our regulars here. And you said if we're winning, don't say anything. That's exactly right. If you're winning, don't pull defeat out of the jaws of victory. If you're winning, you don't need to say anything. And the cases I like the most are ones where I say nothing. So those are really good. Um, again, what's going to happen is the case will be processed for decision. You usually should get that. I used to tell people 3 or 4 weeks, now maybe 5 or 6 weeks, and then the money will show up typically a week or so or 2 weeks after that. So that's what's going to happen. As far as trying to work, you could, but just make sure you're below SGA or you're within the trial work period. It's just a matter of how you want to deal with that. But I used to tell people, you know, get the money coming in before you start working, and just make sure everything's working fine. And in terms of the Social Security process, then if you want to try to find a job, go for it. Christina from California. Christina is one of my regulars, president of the fan club out in California, and good to see you here. Thank you for tuning in as always. Hakasad, thanks for the earlier vlog. Very enlightening. VEs answer only hypothetical questions or they review a claimant's case. This is a very good question. So the VE is the vocational witness, and most of the time judges at hearings will have vocational experts there because the issue in a disability case is whether you have the capacity to return to past work or possibly do something else, but the judge needs to know what your past work is. So the first thing that the vocational witness will do is classify your past jobs, and they use something called the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. You can see it at occupationalinfo.org. It is outdated, last updated in the 1990s, crazy as that may sound. They still use it along with some other things, but that is one of the main sources they use. So the vocational witness will try to identify your job based on the DOT code, and the job is going to either be unskilled, semi-skilled, or skilled. And there's something called an SVP, which stands for specific vocational preparation. Basically, a SVP, 1 or 2 is unskilled, 3 to 5 is semi-skilled, 6 and above is skilled. Jobs can either be sedentary, which means sitting for 6 hours, standing and walking no more than 2 hours, 5 pounds lifting frequently, 10 pounds on occasion. Frequently means 6 hours in a day, occasionally means 2 hours in a day, approximately. And then light, you have, again, 6 hours standing and walking, 10 pounds frequently, 20 pounds on occasion. So the vocational witness will classify your past work. And the judge uses that for the hypothetical question. And what Hakasad is saying is absolutely correct. The judge will say, Mr. Vocational Witness, I want you to assume a hypothetical person who's the same age, has the same education, and the same work experience as our claimant. Obviously, they're talking about you. This individual is limited to light work, but no climbing ladders, ropes, and scaffolds. So the judge is saying the person can stand 6 hours and lift up to 20 pounds, but no climbing ladders, ropes, and scaffolds, no reaching overhead with the right dominant arm, no twisting at the waist, no bending at the knees. This person needs to avoid extremes of temperature and pulmonary irritants. So what the judge is doing is basically reducing the number of jobs at the light exertional level that could be out there. And so the judge will say, the vocational witness, could this person return to past work? And either they could or they couldn't, depending on what the past job was. Are there other jobs this person could do? And the vocational witness will rattle off other jobs they could do. Now, again, here's where, if you meet the grid rules, if you're over 55 and the judge says the person has a light functional capacity, and here's some additional limitations: no climbing ladders, ropes, and scaffolds, no pulmonary irritants, no reaching overhead. And the judge will say, the vocational witness, could this person return to past work? No. Are there any transferable skills? No. You win. So that's kind of what the vocational witness does. So the vocational witness is not there to hurt you or help you. The vocational witness is there to help the judge understand more about the jobs that might exist that you could do. And, as I said, I mean, the judge generally is going to know what the vocational witness is going to testify about, but they ask these hypothetical questions anyway. You want as many limitations in that hypothetical as you possibly can get. So, you don't want the vocational witness to come up with, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 jobs, which are representative. There could be more because the judge's hypothetical is so, minimally restrictive. We want the judge to come up with a lot of restrictions. And one of the ones that they usually come up with at the end is a person being off task for 15% of the day or 10% of the day, depending on the vocational witness, the person missing 1 or more days of work per month. Most vocational witnesses will say if you're going to be absent or come in late or leave early more than 1 or sometimes 2 days a month, um, there are no jobs you could do. So we want the judge to put as many restrictions in as possible. But like I said, many times the grid rules will short circuit all this and get us an approval much more quickly. But if you're under 50, you got to go through this whole exercise. A judge may end up asking 3, 4, 5, 7 hypothetical questions, one of which reflects what the judge is thinking. We don't know what that is, but the judge is going to come up with one, and they'll either approve or deny your case based on that hypothetical. I can ask my own hypothetical, but again, what I ask is not going to really influence the judge all that much. It just gives me some grounds for appeal if I identify a limitation that the appeals council or district court later on agrees was significant and the judge didn't include it. So the big picture is the vocational witnesses are not there to hurt you or help you. They're there to classify past work. They're there to answer questions for the judge and possibly identify work you could do given the limitations you've got. And your job and your attorney's job is to come up with as many uh, vocational limitations as you possibly can, and that's going to improve your chances of winning. Um, how is a hearing conducted when the claimant has hearing impairments, such as deafness? Um, Good question. I think that Social Security has an obligation to provide maybe a sign language interpreter, um, maybe closed captioning. I don't remember. I've only had 1 or 2, and I think that we had a sign language person, but that was an in-person hearing. So what they do with the video hearing, I don't know. Now, again, the judge could possibly say, I want an in-person hearing so I can have a sign language expert there in the actual hearing office. Whether would do that with video, I don't know. But they do have to make an accommodation for that. Um, if they make an accommodation, does this help the claimant directly or indirectly? I mean, I think that deafness is at certain levels a listing level impairment, and clearly, if you have diagnosed hearing loss, that could eliminate jobs that require frequent interaction with the public or coworkers, vocal interaction. Obviously, there are jobs you don't have any verbal interaction with other people, but a lot of jobs you would. So it's going to eliminate customer service jobs, telephone reception jobs, many sales jobs, things like that. So I think at the end of the day, it will help. And I think also vocational witnesses, if they see a person who has a really difficult time hearing, that would probably reduce the number of jobs, even if there were jobs that you could do. So, for example, there's a job out there that vocational witnesses come up with a lot, a laundry marker. Where you work in a laundry and you basically, put a code, put a stamp in so that the laundry is properly, associated with a person or it's with an order, whatever it may be. You don't need to be able to hear to do that. But every job there's going to be instruction, and you could make an argument that a person with profound hearing loss is going to have a hard time learning what to do if the supervisor doesn't know sign language. Um, so I think it's going to reduce the number of jobs out there. So that will ultimately help, I believe. Rodney, one of our longtime clients. How are you doing, Rodney? Looking forward to, I hope I provide something informative. Thank you. All right, here's where I said I'm testing this new microphone. Everybody seems to say it's working okay, which is good. Um, MD77SA says, case recently approved. Congratulations. You declined back surgery, which you're allowed to do. New pain clinic yesterday gave options of watching, waiting, since sometimes discs heal, or option of second opinion from neurosurgeon. I always know I can't do surgery, but I agreed to the referral. Now I regret it. I want to cancel. Will canceling be okay? And cancel a possible CDR. I think so. Again, you know, and I will tell you, you know, if I didn't get a chance to talk to this week, my colleague Stephanie Joy and I disagree a little bit. She believes that you know, if you refuse treatment, that can be held against you. I disagree. I think that if you refuse invasive treatment like surgery because of concern about poor effect, you know, that doesn't work real well, you're concerned about side effects or possible complications or death, then it's okay to not undergo surgery. I stand by that. I think that that's the correct interpretation. So MD77 is saying here, you know, I went to, you know, I won my case. Um, I declined back surgery, which again shows that you can do that. I went to a new clinic, and the doctor says, "Why don't you talk to a neurosurgeon one more time?" But MD is saying, "You know, I really kind of decided no surgery for me. If I cancel the appointment, will that be a problem?" I think the answer is no. I don't think it's a problem. So it goes back to the same concept. If you had a CDR and they saw that you had canceled the appointment and they asked why, you know, I was really concerned about potentially negative result. I was concerned about side effects of medications. I was concerned I didn't have the money. You know, whatever I didn't have anybody to help me during a post-surgical time, things like that. So I think all those things factor in, and you know, making a decision to cancel an appointment, I don't think we'd be held against you at all. Just document it. I think you just need to document it. And yeah, I don't think it's a mistake to cancel it if it doesn't make any sense, and it's not going to do any good anyway. You're not going to do it. Okay, Kathy Clayton had told me I sound good. So again, if those just who just joined, I'm using a new microphone. So if it doesn't sound good, please let me know. Dolphin, hello from California. Dolphin, hello. I sound great. Okay, that is good. And again, we're going back to the case of a CDR. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Rodney says, okay, you're looking forward to another. That's good. Um, Stephanie says, my examiner asked me to take a cognitive test on your ability to process information, but never sent anything. It's been over a month. My 55th birthday is about 2 weeks ago. To go, any clue? Um, yeah, you know, again, you can't force them to um, give you a cognitive test. And again, that would simply show there are certain limitations you might have that would perhaps eliminate semi-skilled or skilled jobs. Um, Being 55 obviously helps. It gives you the grid rule if you have something, uh, or some orthopedic issue, some what they call exertional problem, some physical problem. The grid rules could very well apply. I will tell you this, I'm seeing a lot of cases where they will approve the case as of the person's 55th birthday. I had one I was working on today, and they cut out 2 years of past due benefits, approved my guy at 55 instead of 53. And I said, look, we can appeal that. And he's like, no, I don't want to take the risk. But you know, if you're I will tell you this, if you're 53 and a half, 54, and you've got a physical problem, you might meet the grids, and you're thinking about, let me go ahead and apply, you can do that, but do not be surprised if they approve you as of your 55th birthday, because that's just the way they can. It's easier to get approved that way, and they can save a little bit of money. So making a decision when to stop work, you know, it may make more sense to try to hang on until 55, since you probably won't get paid before then anyway. I don't know if that makes sense, everybody, but 55 is a big deal in the Social Security world. Um, okay, Ian says, just shared my feed with the brain injury group on Facebook. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I've actually had a number of traumatic brain injury cases. I actually spoke to a brain tumor group at a local hospital, and there's a number of different ways to win cases when there is brain injury or brain tumors. You can argue there's a listing that could come into play. You could possibly argue grid rules if there are physical limitations that arise from brain damage. And as a person loses the capacity for walking for balancing or walking steady. I've seen that happen, or maybe some visual issues where they can't see as well because of brain damage and it impacts them exertionally. And then you've got, which is usually what I'm going to mostly rely on with a brain injury, would be um, functional capacity. So again, there are three theories, just for anybody who doesn't know this. There are three theories, three arguments you can use to win a disability case. One is called meeting a listing. The listing is where Social Security has identified certain medical issues that on their face are disabling. I have a website dedicated to the listings called meetalisting.com. You might want to take a look at that. And it's hard to meet a listing. And generally speaking, those are the cases that are approved early. People have something really, really significant and they meet a listing and they get approved early. The second way to win a case is called the grid rules. And that is basically when you're over 50, and even more so at 55 and 60, if you have a physical limitation, even if you have some capacity to do sit down or light work, you can still be found disabled, because Social Security realizes that people over 50, or even more so, again, over 55, are going to have a really hard time getting back into the workforce. So I think that that is another way to win. And the third argument is called functional capacity. And by the way, the grid rules, I've got a website, gridrules.net. And then functional capacity is basically what's the kitchen sink. You put everything in there: medication side effects, pain, associated conditions, depression, as well as the brain injury or the other underlying main condition. And the combined effect of all those things leaves the person without the capacity to be a reliable employee. Because remember, Social Security disability asks, would you be reliable and dependable? And that's what you have to prove that you're not. So that's when I would argue in a brain injury type of case. Sometimes all three of those arguments, you can use all three of them, but typically it's going to be functional capacity and something else. And if the person's limitations are such where they have to rest too frequently, they have cognitive loss, processing loss, emotional stability issues, any number of things that can arise, even balance issues, things like that, then those can be very, very strong cases, even for people under age 50. Okay. 4 o'clock lover. Good evening. It's great, Christy. Thank you for warning last week about the cold that came. Apparently, more is coming on Friday. Yes, that is. Again, here it's supposed to be, I think, 25 at night, and I think 34, 35 during the day. It's like, I'm not a big fan of the cold weather, so this is not going to be fun. I normally have a kind of a standing tennis game on Thursday afternoons, and everybody on the list basically said forget it. And I've got a match, like a US, it was called Alta, but it's like USTA on Sunday, and I'm the captain, so I put myself in the lineup. It's going to be like 45 degrees. So I had one this past week, and it was about 48, 49, warmed up a little bit, and I played. Once you get moving around, it's not too bad, but that cold weather. It's pretty brutal, especially when it's a little moist. It just gets in your bones. Okay, but yeah, Christy, hopefully the cold weather will be fleeting and will be on its way. I think I read where maybe 8 or 10 days it's going to get warm again. So who knows? Um, Dolphin says, I just got an SSA notice letting me know my case is in review. I should be hearing something in 15 to 30 days. I'm in appeal. Is this a good sign? It's not a good or a bad sign. It just means somebody's looking at it, kind of a final review. Social Security employees have multiple levels of administration. They are under a certain obligation to process a certain number of cases. And then when they do, somebody else has to sign off on it at certain levels. They have some random things where they have to, somebody will look at a case. So this just means that it's moving along. So that's good. But I don't think you can assume it means anything as far as, when your case is going to be, whether it's going to be approved or not. I just think it's just a matter of, it's being processed along. T-Lux says, hello, T-Lux. There you go. Choice by choice, or choice. I received a fully favorable. Yay, that's great. On the record, which is good, no hearing. My question is, can you get back pay and retroactive pay at the same time? Well, first of all, retro pay and back pay I usually consider to be the same thing. But basically, what that means is, let's say that you filed and you were approved. We'll just keep it simple. You were approved as of an onset date of, you know, March 15th of 2024, and now it's January of 2026. Well, you won't get paid the first. That's called the 5 month waiting period. You don't get paid the first 5 months. So March 15th is our onset date. You don't get paid for the rest of March. You don't get paid for April, May, June, July, August. Your first month of past due is September. So you'll get a lump sum from September through January, and then you start getting monthly payments thereafter. That's how that works. But the retro pay and past back pay, I consider to be kind of the same thing. Um, Walter Knott did a video this week saying SSA is finally going to be an updated book of job listings coming out sometime this year. They've been talking about it for a long time. I'll believe it when I see it. The problem is that what he's talking about is the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, which is, again, as we all know, is way outdated. Um, the problem is getting some consensus on what is the replacement. There was something out there called the ONET. There's two or three different possibilities. The problem is, is there evidence to say that these other resources are accurate? Because you know jobs do change, and Social Security has an obligation to make sure that the resource they're looking at is accurate. There'll be court challenges to it. Um, I think there's also some concern that vocational witnesses are going to have to be retrained in how to use these new sources. Judges have to be retrained. My point is even if they announce there's a new resource, it's going to take a couple of years before it gets integrated into the process, and there may be some challenges. As bad as the DOT is, everybody knows what it's all about, and I think there's just I think we're a ways away. I mean, Walter may know something I don't know, but I think it's going to be a couple of years at the earliest, at least in my opinion. 4 o'clock level. What kind of training do the VEs have to do to get to this job? Well, actually, it's interesting because when you get a hearing notice, the VE's resume will be in the hearing notice, so you can see what their experience has been. A lot of them have done work placing people with disabilities, or they're rehabilitation counselors, things like that. Sometimes they're psychologists who work with people trying to get into a different kind of field. Job counselors, things like that. There's any number of things, but most of them have done some sort of placement type of work where they deal with employers and people that have medical or psychological issues that limit their capacity in some way. Um, you know, I've mentioned this before. There is a school of thought in the disability world where some of my colleagues will take a very, very aggressive approach against the vocational witnesses. Will ask a lot of questions about qualifications and methodology. In fact, there was a ruling, and the rulings are what Social Security uses. It's kind of like precedent, and something that all judges have to follow, where they recognize that the DOT is outdated, and they basically give almost like instructions for the judge to qualify the VE's testimony. They will ask this sort of series of questions, about to the VE about where they came up with their job numbers, what resources they use. A lot of them use a program called Job Browser Pro, and they'll just talk about their own experience just to qualify the VE a little bit better, so that it's you're not using a 35 or 40-year-old resource in the DOT. Haven't actually seen that much of that lately, but up until the end of the year, it was every single case the judge would ask these kind of rote questions of the vocational witnesses. Um, but I think that as an attorney, you have to make a decision. Are you going to be an aggressive? You're going after the VEs aggressively, um, because judges don't like that, or are you going to just deal with it more in appeal, ask your question politely, get the VE to answer something that you can argue, attack, and appeal? That's kind of my approach. I mean, fortunately, most of my cases have been winners, so I'm not having to really deal with a VE. I just have always thought if you're having to cross-examine a VE aggressively, means you're probably not winning anyway. Um, but I know, again, a lot of attorneys that are really, really smart who've done this for a long time, um, basically feel like you have to ask questions of the VE. There's certain statements that they make that are there's evidence to suggest that's not correct. I'll give an example. One limitation sometimes that judges will put into question would be that this person should have minimal interaction with with coworkers and supervisors, namely because perhaps they have bipolar, they have some sort of mental health issue, and they have to have minimal interaction with their supervisor. Well, if it's a job that has a 6 week or 3 month or 8 month training program, there's going to be constant interaction with coworkers, with supervisors for that first 8 or 9 months. So by definition, this person would not be able to get through training because of the problem they would have with frequent interaction with supervisors. So that would be an argument that you could use the VE to say, well, Mr. VE, the judge's hypothetical says minimal interaction with supervisors, but you've given us a job that is an SVP 7 job, a skilled job. Isn't it true that in skilled jobs that the training can be up to a year? And yes, and isn't it true that that training would likely involve intensive interaction between the trainee, uh, the employee, and the supervisor? You know, if the VE says no, then well, how do you get trained if you're not getting, supervised? If the VE says yes, so then based on the judge's hypothetical, this person wouldn't make it through probation. That's an example of how to cross-examine a vocational witness. Um, Again, you have to make a decision. But to get back to the question, they are mostly people who've had knowledge about placing people. They have knowledge about the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, other resources that help the labor market determine how many jobs are out there and what it takes to fulfill one of those jobs. They have expertise in that. They're usually also given access to your folder so they can see what your past work was. There's a form you might fill out that says how much you weigh, how much you had to lift, stand, walk, and things like that. So they have knowledge about your case based on what's in the paper. They will hear you. I will tell you, most vocational witnesses are not there to hurt you. They're not looking for a reason to make your life difficult. They just have to answer the questions the judge gave them. But that is a very good question. Um, 7X through 6 months in recon will my attorney submit new medical documents. I believe he doesn't want to send duplicates. That's correct. I mean, the adjudicators prefer to get the medical evidence on their own. 6 months is not that long in recon. I would probably just sit tight, ask your attorney to, reach out to the adjudicator to see if there's anything they're missing that might enable them to make a decision at recon. Maybe something you can do. Um, DASBOF. If you have an unfiled tax return, can you submit it to SSA? I think there is a form, I'm not sure for the 7008, where if you're trying to get more credits, there's a form you could submit to try to get, or you can do your tax return. That might get you an extra credit or two so that you are insured or you're insured for Title II disability benefits. Somebody sent me okay. Thought it was a text from one of my staff saying I can't hear you or something like that. So anyway, you can correct that to a certain degree. If I'm not mistaken, you cannot submit a tax return more than 3 years old. This was for a tax year more than 3 years prior. Again, that's beyond what I do, but I think if you have unfiled tax returns, and that might give you extra work credits that would make you qualified for disability, that would be something to certainly look at doing. Okay, this is a person who had a question before. I'm not going to go back to that. Okay, no, this is a silly question. There are no silly questions. SSA has a CDR time frame for those. Doctors always write that they give you the choice. This is the person who's concerned about refusing surgery. Um, I think the time frame, for a CDR, most of the time it's going to be 3 or 4 years. If you're over 50, it's not real likely. And even if they do it, they're not likely to move to terminate benefits. Really, it's a CDR is simply saying they're asking questions. It doesn't mean they're moving to terminate you. Then they have to make a decision. Are we going to move to terminate, or are we going to just let the person continue receiving benefits? So, I think people get very much freaked out about CDRs. If you're over 55, I would tell you not to worry about it. Over 50, don't worry about it too much. Under 50, yeah, you got to be aware of it. You got to keep going to the doctor, and you may need to prove your case all over again. Um, okay. What if my permanent disability states no twisting or bending more than 5% of the workday and no repetitive lifting? Well, first of all, repetitive, what does that mean? Is that 2/3 of the day? And what is the pound limit on that? Need to be a little more specific. But those limitations, if they're in the record, would be put into the hypothetical. So there are jobs where you have to do twisting or bending more than 5% of the day. Now, again, 5% a day is not a lot. Um, so, or maybe what you're saying is you can only twist or bend no, up to 5% of the day, which is obviously not very much at all. So essentially, it means no twisting or bending. So again, in the universe of jobs in the DOT, there are, I don't know how many jobs there are in the DOT, but a certain percentage of them require you to twist um, and bend. So that being the case, those jobs would be eliminated, but there are other jobs that don't require twisting and bending. So it's just a matter of, is that the only limitation you've got? It's probably not going to be enough. If you have more than that, that's going to add on to the mix and make it hard for Social Security to prove there is a job you could do. Tambrito, Tamabrito. Okay, I'm on my second appointment with the Social Security doctor. How does this affect? It sounds like you're getting a consultative evaluation, another one. I sometimes see 3 or 4 of them in there, so it's just not that unusual, unfortunately. And sometimes I will tell you this, in the physical consultatives, a lot of times, unfortunately, the exams don't say anything. They just repeat um, what the claimant is alleging. I can't stand for more than 15 or 20 minutes. I can't sit for more than 15 or 20 minutes. I have severe pain. And you look at the end, severe pain, limitations on standing, limitations on walking, limitations on sitting. It doesn't give how, is it a 5 minute limitation on sitting or is it 5 hours? We don't know. So sometimes when these CEs come back with kind of very vague and useless information, Social Security will send you out for another one, hoping something better comes back. Um, Colby Overhagen says, I had to appeal my case, so I'm here waiting patiently for the verdict. Yeah, it's not a verdict, it's just a finding at the appeals council um, as to whether or not you are, the case should be remanded back to the judge. Andy Griffith, so not Andy Griffith like the Andy Griffith show. I was awarded SSDI approval in March of 25 at age 60 with a 5 to 7 year CDR. There's not going to be a CDR. There will not be one because in 5 years you'll be so close to retirement age, you're just not. It wouldn't make any sense for them to do it. So it'll be again. To answer the question, it could be any place in that 5 to 7 year range. The odds of it happening to you are slim and none, based on your age. ALS, I think you said, what about ALS? I'm not sure what context. That is Lou Gehrig's disease, obviously the one you probably remember a few years ago, people were doing the ALS challenge. I think Steve Gleason from the New Orleans Saints had it. There have been a number of high profile people. It is a debilitating, disease that will ultimately cause death, unfortunately. It is one of, I think, 2 conditions where there is no 5 month waiting period. So if you apply, you have ALS, no 5 month waiting period, you get your benefits right away, and it speeds up the Medicare approval. But that's small consolation because you don't want to have ALS. But that is one of the few that has a no 5 month waiting period, and those cases are going to be on the compassionate allowance. They'll be approved under the listing because the compassionate allowance is a function of the listing or it's a subset of the listing. But those cases are almost always going to get approved if you're even minimally symptomatic because they know what's coming down the pike, unfortunately. Colby, would there be a chance I have to go in front of a judge to plead your case? Colby, let's see what you had asked me before. Where's Colby's? I can't find it here. I apologize. I just don't see it here. So anyway, I don't remember what you'd asked before. Is this it? Have to appeal my case, waiting for the verdict. Okay, at the appeals council or district court level, you will not go before a judge. But what the goal of the appeal would be is to get the case remanded back to the ALJ for another hearing, in which case you would have to appear. Christina says, please press the like button. How difficult are continuing reviews when you turn 50? What are some tips? I think that, the way to look at a CDR is really the same as when you're applying for benefits. You have to prove that you remain disabled, right? Um, and you've already been found disabled, which is a good thing. And so you have to have medical evidence to support the fact that you remain disabled, that nothing has changed for the better, which is why you have to go to the doctor. If there are third parties that have observed you, you can get those statements. You're obviously older, which is a good thing. But I see the problem in CDRs. So let's say somebody had a disability approval because of a bad back problem. They undergo surgery and it's successful, which is obviously a good thing. Now their limitations are much less. A person had, bilateral carpal tunnel, underwent surgery, they're doing better. That's where you find the CDR, medical improvement. Or there's evidence a person is actually working. That can be in the form of earnings record, obviously, or it could be in the form of medical notes where the doctor makes a note that, Tommy said he's back at work, working in a, automobile shop or a plant nursery or something like that. You may be getting paid cash, but it's not the earnings so much as what the activity is. So that's what's going to trigger it. But I think at 50, you're getting closer to that retirement age. You're still, 15, 16 years away, but you're getting closer. The people who are in their 30s and 40s, they're going to be claiming against the disability trust fund for the next 30 or 40 years. You may be for the next 10 years, 15 years. So they're the bigger target than you. But yeah, it's going to really come down to medical improvement or are you working? Christina Peace. I've been diagnosed with severe osteoarthritis, degenerative disc disease, moderate spondylosis. Spondylosis and degenerative disc disease are the same thing, just synonyms. Severe narrow or foramental narrowing. Do I have a case? I think depends on how old you are to some degree. I have an osteoporosis case coming up next week. And what I've got in my case is compression fractures and severe pain and things like that. I would say this, if you're under age 50, it's going to really depend a lot on the judge. I mean, in the severity of the problem and how the medical record discusses your limitations. If you're over 55, all I got to prove is you can't do light work. And that's going to be, I think fairly easy with all these problems. And if you're between 50 and 55, it's going to depend on the evidence. But if you had something from your doctors saying that you have severe pain that makes it impossible to focus and concentrate, 3 or 4 days a week for 3 or 4 hours, then that's going to be as a functional capacity argument. It's going to be excessive. So it kind of depends. But I would first question to ask you, Christina, how old are you? Jody Maxwell. I need surgery in my neck. I'm waiting for a hearing appointment. Should I wait to have surgery until after your hearing? I don't ever like to tell somebody to make medical decisions based on their Social Security case. Um, you know, I don't know that a judge is going to keep a record open to find out what happened. If you meet the qualifications, the judge will put you in for a 1 or 2 year CDR is what would probably happen. I would just say, get your surgery when you can get it, because generally speaking, when you have, back issues, neck and back issues, there could be some nerve compression. The longer it goes without that being released, the more difficult your recovery is going to be. So I'd focus on your health first and foremost. Let Social Security take care of itself, because even if you have a surgery, they're going to assume for maybe 2 months, 3 months, you're in recovery anyway. So, you can always go for a closed period, but don't let Social Security hearing considerations impact on what you do medically, because your health is a lot more important than any disability case.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so next one, okay, Mitchkin 43. I just turned 65 and been on SSDI for 20 years for neurological disease. Are my CDRs over and can I use my trial work periods without having issues? Um, I think I hate to say they're over, but yeah, you're not gonna have any of those. In the trial work period, if I'm not mistaken, and again, I'm not a retirement Social Security person, but my understanding is when you hit full retirement age, which may be 65 or 66, you can work as much as you want without being a problem. So I'd find that out and just find out what your full retirement age is, when it's going to switch over, and could you work at that point if you're getting retirement benefits without jeopardizing things? That would be the question I would ask. But I think that you're in pretty good shape as far as not seeing a challenge or review. All right. Lorraine, Oregon. Good evening. I've seen EP cardiologist for the supraventricular contractions or SVT. I think that's like AFib, that sort of thing. Could not fix it. I had a cardiac MRI, shows my heart's healthy, but a large hiatal hernia is pricking against my heart. He sent me to a surgeon. I have no reflux, will hurt my recon if I don't do surgery. I've had 3 surgeries in the last 20 months, 2 big leg surgeries. I'm sick of surgeries. Thanks so much. My mic works. Okay, you got a lot in there. Um, Laura. Oh, I'm sorry, Laura. Okay, I did just tell your picture there. Okay, I mean, I think that it is not going to hurt your case to not have surgery. I mean, you've had 3 surgeries in the last 20 months. And if you decide I'm not going to cut on anymore, I'm not getting cut on anymore. And if they can deal with your heart issues with medication, which many times they can, or something non-invasive for the hiatal hernia, then that's what I would do. But it will not hurt you not to have the surgery. Regarding the MD77 SA, regarding the Social 827, you fought for the release of information. So is that end after a case approval? They may send you additional ones, to do some preliminary work prior to a CDR. So don't be surprised to get those periodically. Um, and so, yeah, the 827 is just a medical authorization. But it doesn't mean you're going to have a CDR. It doesn't mean you're going to get benefits cut off. It just means that they're going to want to be able to contact the doctors, and so they need current ones. Back in the day, when we did all live hearings, we would literally have to show up at the hearing with 3 or 4 wedding signed 827s to give to the judge in case they need to request more information. Now it's gone electronic, but that they still consider to be pretty important. MD77, do you recommend just documenting in your own personal files all your pertinent medical records in case of future review? Yeah, I mean, certainly that's a good place to put it. A notebook, pain diary, things like that. It should be personal. I don't think you want to put it out on the internet, for people to see. I think it should be, very personal to you. But yeah, I would do that. I think that's probably not a bad idea. Jody Maxwell, I'm 60, need neck surgery. I'm waiting for a hearing date. I filed 2 years ago. My neck has gotten worse. Should get surgery or try to wait. Again, make your decision based on your medical needs. The Social Security will take care of itself. If you have surgery and it goes really well, you come back and ask for a closed period. If you've already been approved, then if you go back to work, you tell them and they'll cut you off. If you haven't been approved yet, then the surgery, we're not going to know for certain, was it really successful for 4, 5, 6 weeks, maybe 3 months. So I would not let a disability case pending uh, affect your decision about whether to undergo treatment. Okay, four down, 4 o'clock lover. The listing says that you talk about what they call vocational allowance or something different. Is the listing I talk about what they call vocational allowance? No, it's actually more of a medical allowance. If you look at the listings, they describe medical issues. Let me pull it up so you can see. Oh, I can spell it correctly. There we go. All right, so I'm going to share my screen so you can see this. All right, so this is my website called metalisting.com. It's up there. It's just I just wrote it about the listings. So let's actually look at a couple of the listings. All right. So let's look at the cardiovascular disease listing. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger here. Here we go. All right. So it describes a listing of impairments. Oops. Let's see. Cardiovascular system. Okay. So we've got the cardiovascular system. So let's look at chronic heart failure. And there's, by the way, when you look at the listing, there will be a lot of verbiage about, the type of testing that was done and what they mean by certain terms, that sort of stuff. Let's look at chronic heart failure. So 4.02 says chronic heart failure while on a regimen of prescribed treatment with symptoms and signs described at 4.00D2. So let's look at that. Um, Enlarged heart, ventricular dysfunction, abnormal imaging, various wall thickness. These are all things that I think would apply in that situation. So it's systolic failure. You have diastolic and systolic, meaning when the blood, the heart's pumping pumping or going back into the I guess where it pumps out then pumps back in, because it's constantly pumping. So systolic failure is one type of failure, diastolic failure is another type of, and so it just talks about the ejection fraction here. 30% or less ejection fraction is when the blood is being pumped out of the heart, what percentage of that blood is being properly pumped, how strong is the pumping mechanism is what the ejection fraction is. Normal is going to be 55 or 60. If it's below 30, you're in systolic failure. That would be a listing level impairment. Diastolic would be some thickness, enlarged heart type of thing where the blood is not being pumped out of the heart, it's getting bigger and bigger. That's dangerous as well. So that's an example of a listing. But you can see, and then it says, and resulting in persistent symptoms, episodes of acute congestive heart failure, inability to perform on a test type of thing, fatigue, shortness of breath, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a functional component here, not just the medical part. There's a functional component, which there is in most of these listings. So you have to have a very, very significant and severe medical problem, plus you have to have a related functional limitation to meet a listing. Well, what happens if you have an ejection fraction? This listing says 30%. Let's say your ejection fraction is 35%. What would you do? Well, you could argue that you equal a listing that even if you're not exactly 30%, the functional impact is equivalent to someone with 30%. That's one way to do it. Or you could say, I don't meet a listing, or if you could argue you meet a listing, but if I don't, my functional capacity has been so reduced by the side effects of the medications. I'm on Lasix, so I've got to urinate 4 times an hour. That I'm significant chest pain. I'm on nitroglycerin, which causes terrible headaches. I have chronic shortness of breath. I'm fatigued. I have to lie down for 30 minutes 4 times a day. You could argue functional capacity in that. So basically, the listing is one angle, but it's really focused more on the medical diagnosis, whereas with some reference to functional limitations, a functional capacity argument is one where you're primarily focused on the functional limitations. And as long as you have a diagnosis that's consistent with those, then if you can prove that your functional issues are disabling you, you win. Okay. Let me put this. Okay, I just put this. If you're enjoying the live stream, here's a link to leave me a review. I have people, that see the live stream and they say, or my videos, and say this really helped me. If it does, I would really appreciate a review. I put these out because I want to, to share what I know. It does help me greatly if you like them and you would put a review out there. And then I think I've got here on this crawl now. And you can also go to jonathanginsberg.com if you missed the crawl. I'll be putting it up periodically here. But for a case evaluation, you can go to this link here, or you go to ssdanswers.com and you can see the link there. But that's how to get a hold of me, and that's how um, to learn a little bit more about what we do. Okay, Jim 6002, been on SSDI for 4 years, will be 60 in May. Early happy birthday. Already had a CDR 3 years ago. Recently found I'm required to have a new knee surgery. Should I expect an inquiry? Probably not. I mean, keep your records. If they ask for them, you can provide them. But it's not like they have this you know huge group of people that are sitting around looking to see if somebody's had another surgery or if they've got better or worse. Some of it's random, quite frankly, and some of it is just the algorithm where they look at a person based on the age and the nature of the problem, and they figure, well, time will make things better. And so let's see if this person has now gotten better because they passage of time they've rested it out. Um, okay, Rachel Rogers. I've recently filed for SSDI. My diagnosis are multi-level degenerative disc disease, lumbar radiculopathy, a multi-level disc bulge, central canal stenosis, bone spurs, bilateral sciatica, foot drop, and you've been given a walker. These are all very significant conditions. And I would tell you, Rachel, if you're over age 55, you almost certainly meet the grid. If you're between 50 and 55, you probably meet the grid. If you're under 50, you're going to have to argue functional capacity. But if the evidence does show canal stenosis, which means the canal where the spinal cord goes through is very narrow, you've got foot drop, which says it's a nerve problem, bilateral sciatica, which is very painful. You're using a walker, that's going to eliminate all but sedentary jobs because even a light job, you have to walk around. You can't be using a walker. So if you're over 50, I think you have a good argument for the grids because over 50, you can be found disabled if you can do sedentary work. You're limited to sedentary at most with a walker. So if you're over 50, I think it's really, really strong. If you're under 50, I think that you just have to look at the nature of the evidence and what the doctors are saying. Will the doctor support you when you say I can't do any kind of job at all? But overall, it sounds like a pretty good case. Is this live? This is live, Christina. I am live. I go live every Thursday evening around 8:30. In the summertime, sometimes I go to 8:45, just because the West Coast people can join. But usually it's 8:30. But I do this almost. I've been doing it since May of 24. So I enjoy it. And it's a good way to talk to different kind of people and get some really good questions. And it comes up with ideas for videos, things like that. So, Cynthia, how are you doing, Cynthia? Thank you very much for the nice review, by the way. Really appreciated that. Um, okay, Digital Swag is approved for SSDA yesterday after reconsideration. Appreciate me referring. Yes, I do a lot of work with Joe Ewell at Levine Benjamin. Good man, good attorney. And I get sometimes just overwhelmed. I mean, we get a lot of leads in, and I get busy with hearings. And if I hit my breaking point at a particular point, there are people I refer out to, Joe being one of them, Gary and Joe over there at Levine Benjamin, and they're very good attorneys. I keep trying to get Joe to come on, but he's got some equipment issues that hopefully will get past this year. I can get him on. But he's a bright guy, and Marcy in their office, really sharp people, and they do a good job. I've had really good results with people that I've sent over there. Okay, Hakasad. What are the chances of winning SSDI with an onset date of 10 years earlier? I'm in recon. Do I have all the retro direct medical records in my nerve conduction settings, so forth? So what he's asking is if my onset date is 2015, 2016, what are my chances of winning? I think in general, unfortunately, that's an uphill battle because you're trying to prove that you are at a disabling level, not now, but 10 years ago. You're obviously 10 years younger at that point. So, that may have taken you out of grid rule territory. I think the biggest issue is getting the medical records because a lot of times what happens is doctors, they close their practice down, they merge with somebody else, they get bought out, records get in storage, they get lost, you can't get the records. That's a really big issue. So, and then, asking a doctor who hasn't seen you in, you know, 8, 9 years to fill out a functional evaluation, they're not going to do it. And a new doctor is not going to be able to talk about what's going on 10 years ago. I mean, can you remember what you were doing 10 years ago? So I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's really an uphill battle, is my point. Okay. Marisol, I went to my I think you mean consultative evaluation, and I made a mistake with the education part of the paperwork. Did not check that you have a GED. I wouldn't worry about that. I mean, you've put your education level in the other paperwork, um, and if that is the only thing that's incorrect on a consultative evaluation, it's not going to make a difference. The judge will know if you get in front of the judge, will know what it is. If you feel that you really want to correct it, I would write the doctor and just say, I realized I made a mistake and I told you I had just completed elementary school and in fact I have a GED. Please make that change for the record. I don't think it's going to make a bit of a difference at all. But if you want to, be as completely accurate as possible, in other words, that kind of mistake is not one that's going to make a judge say you're dishonest. You know, the judge will probably assume that the I see it all the time. The consultant will say claimant has an eighth grade education when in fact they have a college education, or claimant has a high school education when they have a ninth grade education. That's not what they're there to do. They're looking at medical problems, not so much your education level. But again, if you wanted just to write a quick letter to the provider or to the adjudicator saying this is an error, I want to correct it, be my guest. I wouldn't probably tell you to worry about it because it's going to make any difference at all. Um, Lucky Southern Girl. I had a hearing on Friday. The judge accepted our RFC, your functional capacity form, found no transferable skills, no questions of the VE. The judge at 53, they DLI, date less insured 2023 attorney, congratulating me. How long to hear in Atlanta? Um, I'm telling you, it's going to be, for decision anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. They're behind right now. They're behind right now. So sounds like you got a pretty reasonable judge, which is good. Okay, Rachel had asked the question before. Doctor states my condition is complex. Rachel is the person who's got multi-level degenerative disc disease and foot drop and all that. Um, Doctor states got a condition that's complex. PT physical therapy has failed. Now starting pain management. The pain is unmanageable. Just curious about my claim the first time applying. I mean, I think again, I still don't know how old you are. That's going to be a big factor here. But my point here is that you've got some significant problems. And, you know, you could certainly make an argument, especially if you're close to the listing, that you should be, or the grid rule that you should be approved. The problem you run into is that musculoskeletal issues are the most difficult medical problem to win an approval on because so many people have them. Everybody's got back pain. Everybody's got neck and shoulder pain. Um, so to separate yourself from the crowd, you have to have something really, really unique. So I always tell people if we get approved early, that's a bonus. We'll try, but assume, especially with back pain cases, you're going to go to a hearing. But again, the more information you give them, the more statements from the doctor, the better it's going to be. Okay. Okay, here we go. I've been so helpful. Okay. Judge Dale. Okay. Well, he's a nice guy. I have a hearing with him coming up actually on Friday with this particular judge. He is a very reasonable judge. In fact, my case is a death case. My client passed away of the underlying medical problem that was disabling. And again, in front of this judge, I'm pretty comfortable. We've got a real strong argument. His widow will be testifying, but this particular judge doesn't, he's pretty much no nonsense. He's not going to waste a lot of time, I don't think. But he's a good man. He's a good judge, very fair, very reasonable. And look, even if you don't win, I mean, Mike, for me, I shouldn't say when I don't win, even if I don't win in front of a judge, if I got a fair hearing and the judge just didn't buy my argument, okay. Where I get upset is when a judge is just unreasonable or overly demanding or seems to think that the standard of disability is way up here when it's really not. That's what gets me upset. But if you got a reasonable judge, I think this particular judge is in the 50% level approval rating. That's all I can ask for. Harry Pusia. Is that really your name? All right. Anyway, I have to go medically. I have my medically favorable letter from my SSI and my SSD, and now I'm waiting for my non-medical to go through. How good do I look, and how long do you think it'll be before I should see something? The non-medical is to really look for SSI in particular at your assets and household income to see if you qualify for SSI. For SSDI, they're looking for substantial gainful activity. Your work. Have you been working? It can take a few months, a few weeks, depends on how backlogged they are. Um, what is my opinion if the attorney doesn't cross-examine the VE at all? If there's nothing to say, don't say anything. I mean, attorneys, I've learned this, I've done this for 35 years, and I've learned a long, long time ago. If I have nothing to say, don't waste the space. That all you can do is hurt yourself. So if you're winning and the judge asks a hypothetical question and the VE says no jobs, I'm not going to say anything. No questions, Your Honor. If you feel like the judge is biased against you, you can, or the judge asks all the questions you would have asked, you don't need to hear yourself speak. So it just depends on the circumstance. Sometimes an attorney has an obligation to speak out. Again, if the VE used incorrect assumptions, like the one I gave you before about the training period. But other than that, it just depends on the scenario. It's case by case. But not saying anything isn't always a bad thing. Look, just like in the criminal law world, you don't have to if you're a defendant, you don't have to speak. The state's got to prove its case. Sometimes it's better not to say anything. When you start talking, you get yourself in trouble. And I think that that's the case here. If you're winning, keep your mouth shut. I think I've told this story before, but when I was a beginning lawyer many, many, many years ago, I did some bankruptcy work. I did a lot of bankruptcy work for many years. And bankruptcy, unlike Social Security, is done in federal court. It's very the one, at least when I was doing it, it was very kind of intimidating. You go to this very, very large, formal looking courtroom. It's got all the bailiff, and you got the security, and you got, this, the ceilings are 25 feet high, and the judges up on this bench way up there, and the judges are, they're serious people, federal, uh, federal judges, bankruptcy judges are federal judges. And, even though some of the judges, as I got to know them a little bit, they have a little bit of sense of humor. But they had a busy docket. They were not there just for the fun of it. And I remember watching a case because the way I would learn is I would go, early if I had a hearing, and a lot of my hearings were just, 5 or 10 minute arguments about something. But I'd go watch, and there would be cases sometimes that were really substantive cases, a lot of evidence going through and witnesses and so forth. And so I was watching this lawyer who was at the time probably, in his 60s or 70s, obviously been around for a while. And he makes an argument. The judge is like, okay, I can buy that argument. He says, well, I want to tell you more. Okay. And he kept talking and he kept talking. And finally the judge looked at him and said, Mr. So and so, you know, I'm going to grant your motion. But if you want to talk me out of it, feel free to keep talking. And I think the guy finally realized he needed to shut the heck up. So, you know, it's not, some attorneys feel the need to just keep talking. And if you've nothing to say, don't talk. That's my take on it. So you don't always need to cross-examine the VE. Sometimes you do, but not always. Um, okay, Hakasa, I think you're the one asking about a remote um, onset date. Again, being 55 now doesn't help you if you're trying to argue you were disabled at 45. So, this is just, in fact, if it's a physical issue, turning 55 like the week or the month before the hearing can actually hurt your case, because now it's the judge can say, well, I'm going to find you disabled at 55, no past due benefits. So, I get, in fact, I get a little wary of even taking cases sometimes when the person's, their hearing is coming up. They're going to be 55 in March, and we're going to get a hearing in June. It's because, I may get a decision that approves them as of their 55th birthday, and there'll be no fee for me. My client won't be happy, no past due benefits. It's just going to depend on the circumstances. But being 55 now doesn't help you if you're trying to prove you became disabled at 45. Okay. If approved, if an approved claimant improves in one condition, not in three others, they make the decision. I mean, that's going to be factored in. I mean, if you have congestive heart failure, herniated discs, um, I don't know, severe sleep apnea and major depression, and the sleep apnea is resolved with a CPAP. Um, it doesn't make the other conditions less disabling. It just takes one thing off the table. If it's a really important thing, then yeah, that could hurt you. If it's just if it's one of several, but there's other three are disabling, won't be a very big deal. Okay, Rachel, you're over 50. I think you've got a pretty strong case. I mean, all the things you're describing, about the foot drop and the cervical and the lumbar, you're over 50. I think you're in pretty good shape. Tom, how are you doing, Tom? I sent you an email today, as you know, and I'm working on your case right now. How do they treat a severance package? And that was, again, one of the questions I'd ask you in the email, I think. It is not considered work because you get paid a lump sum, but you've already been separated or terminated. So it's just extra money. And the issue can arise when, let's say that you are earning, let's just pick a number, $50,000 a year, and you stop working in January, and your January of 2025, let's just say, and your earnings for 2024, $50,000, your earnings for 2025 show $40,000 or $30,000. Well, obviously that's 1 month in. So it doesn't make sense you'd have $30,000 of earnings in 1 month. It may be a severance package, it may be accrued vacation. In that circumstance, you document it, you show the judge evidence that this is a severance package, and that does not count as work. They're focused on work done for earnings when you actually physically go in or do the job, but not a severance package. That does not count against you. Please help the people in Iran. Agreed, but this is probably not the forum for that. I don't think there'd be too many people that are going to be focused on Iran right now, although very interesting what's going on there. I actually have a couple of clients who are from Iran, and they're obviously very, very concerned about their family there and what goes on. And it'd be nice to see the current government of Iran go away, because they're bad news, in my opinion, at least. Bammy, how hard is it to get disability for PTSD, anxiety, depression, ADHD? It's difficult because these are invisible illnesses. And, I always tell folks when I'm looking at something like depression or PTSD, which is an anxiety disorder, um, you've got to show some indicia of severity: inpatient hospitalizations, failed medication trials, suicide attempts, statements from people that have worked with you discussing very, very specific performance issues or attendance issues you had because of those things. Um, so you can win, but realize most people applying for disability are going to have some level of depression because they can't work. They're not making any money. They're going to be depressed. So I think that you know, you have to show something more than kind of mild to moderate depression or anxiety. PTSD. flashbacks. I mean, I think I've told this story, but I've got a client right now. We had a second hearing, lost an initial, lost the first hearing, went to the district court, got it remanded back to the same judge, which is upsetting, but it is what it is. This gentleman had, I mean, he was being threatened. I'll just leave it at that. He was being threatened by foreign actors because of the work he did. His family and he were being threatened with, all kind of nasty things and death and kidnapping and all that stuff. And he'd been in theater, and so had really bad PTSD. The judge didn't want to believe it. So it's hard. I mean, some judges will buy it and some don't. It's just really hard, but you need indicia of severity and a judge that would be sympathetic to that. ADHD, I will tell you, I've never won a case solely on ADHD. Um, I think that there are people with ADHD that really their ability to focus and concentrate is so impaired they probably would not be reliable employees for whatever reason, like male fibromyalgia, ADHD or sleep apnea is another one. Judges don't find these things inherently disabling. It can add to another problem. It can maybe make your focus and attention where you would be limited to a one or two step type of job, but it's generally not going to disable you from any job. Now, if you're a child, you're pursuing child disability benefits, it's a little bit of a different story. But as an adult ADHD, I've never gotten any traction with it. And I personally believe that a person I've known people, I have a couple of people on my tennis team who have ADD or ADHD, and like you're playing tennis with them, and there's a bird, and it's like focus, focus, focus. Don't you got a serve coming at you? You got to hit a forehand. Um, so I think it's a real thing, and I think people that can have it really severely would be really hard time to hold a job, but judges don't seem to buy it for some reason. But yeah, for disability, for PTSD or depression, anxiety, you have to have indicia of severity. Deborah, trying to get my file after denial, but they told me to fill out the 95, not the 3288. Let's see what the 3288, SSA 3288, consent for release of information. You didn't say if it's a denial after a hearing or after a administrative at the initial recon, because when I'm involved in the case, at initial or recon, I can access it in real time. At a hearing, I can get the decision I can download all the exhibits. So if you're represented, your attorney can help you. But if not, um, yeah, the 795 is just a statement. You know, I guess the 3288 is a consent for release of information. Um, it says if you want us to give information of records about you or somebody else to an individual group, a doctor or insurance company. Doesn't sound like it's for you, but I guess you could try it. Put that out there and put self or something and see if they'll do it. I think a lot of people, if they're trying to get their records at initial recon, make an appointment. If you can do that with the local office, go there and ask for the records on CD. That may be something to consider. I don't know why they're making you jump through all those hoops. Other thing you might want to do is contact your U.S. senator, ask for their help, and get cutting through the red tape. T-Cash, SSDI was approved a couple of years ago. They always notify the CDR because they never noticed that. They'll send you a letter and a form if they want a CDR. So until they do, no news is good news. Where do LJs get the ailments to add to the hypothetical VE scenarios? Great question. I think they have just a standard list of limitations. A lot of them come from just functional capacity forms, but there's, I mean, I've got a whole list of questions that I've kind of, gathered over the years. But I think it's, there's most of them are going to be pretty much the same. I think a lot of them just go to like a functional capacity form and just pull it off that. But there's certain questions they're going to ask. No climbing ladders, ropes, and scaffolds. No working on hazardous equipment, dangerous moving machinery. No exposure to unprotected heights. No, no exposure or limited exposure to dust, fumes, gases, and respiratory irritants. And it's just those sort of things. But at the end of the day, the ones that are really important are the ones that talk about reliability. I mean, the physical ones can be important, but off task is going to be it. But it's just, I think they have like a list of questions. Most of them come from a functional capacity form, which you can get online for free. Just type in functional capacity form, Social Security. Danielle knew me. Okay. My doctor has filled out a physician statement. I mailed it with my application. I'm receiving long term from a job. I've had 3 MRIs, which are bad. Um, Disc disease, as well as 2 bulging discs on your left, a big one on the right. Um, I've scheduled with my surgeon for February 3rd. Um, see more there. Okay. I think that, again, I don't know if you told me how old you were. Um, or not. Let's see. Okay. I think you've got to. Let me find Danielle's original question here. There we go. Okay. Um, Yeah, I mean, I think you've got a pretty good argument here. I mean, your doctor's filled out forms. You've got long-term disability, which, by the way, that means that if you get approved, you're going to have to sign over your lump sum to the long-term disability carrier because typically those contracts say that you not only do you have to apply for disability from Social Security, but if you win, you got to repay them back for all the money they paid you to the extent that you're receiving disability. So for example, if your long-term disability benefit is $2,000 a month, your Social Security benefit is $1,800 a month. Social Security will pay you the $1,800. Long-term will start paying you $200 a month the to make it a total of $2,000 a month, as opposed to $200 a month to make it a total of 2,000. So they benefit from your getting on disability. But the positive side of that is they make you pay back your past due, but not the attorney's fees. So in fact, they pick up the attorney's fees. They would be paying me, and they would be paying your lawyer. Um, and there is benefit to getting on Social Security. If the long-term disability tries to cut you off, which they almost always do, you got Social Security in the background. You cost of living with Social Security, which will mean more money as time goes by, and you get eligible for Medicare a couple of years after your first eligibility for payment. So it's worthwhile. Doesn't cost anything. I've got a number of those cases where people are on long-term disability, and we get them on Social Security. They don't see any more money, but it's kind of just a little bit of a backup plan, as it were. But I think Danielle, and I love those cases because again, I'm able to do it for free, basically, for the client. I think you got a pretty good case. I think you got a pretty good case here. MRI evidence, doctor support. I think all those things really work in your favor. You didn't say how old you were, but even a younger person, I think, would be pretty decent. But if you're over 50, absolutely. Um, did I miss some before here? I don't know if I did or not. No, I think I did. Okay. Um, Rip. Okay, Rip. Rip Tiny. Okay. Hello, Jonathan. Hello, Rip. In my denial, the ALJ says I didn't attribute any work-related limitations to my impairment. I'm not a doctor. The judge isn't either. Shouldn't have Emmy answered that. Um, I mean, the ME is going to evaluate the evidence. You and your attorney need to make an argument and show proof that your impairments, do generate work limitations. It sounds like you got a step 2 denial, which means that they didn't find any severe impairments, um, which, a lot of times judges who have very low approval rates will deny at step 2 of the sequential process, saying you have no severe impairments. I think it is your burden to prove that there are significant in medical problems that create work impairments. So, whether that's in the form of a functional evaluation or, you know, looking at the medical record and creating an argument, it is your burden to do it. ME could do it, but the judge is not obligated to call an ME. You could certainly appeal and argue that there should have been ME called, and that you did make a prima facie case of limitations that are work preclusive. It's just going to be kind of fact by fact. But yeah, that is it is what it is. But yes, unfortunate. I'm sorry you didn't win. But someone who did win is Larry, one of my clients. We got a favorable decision yesterday, and you're very, very welcome. And thanks for your call. Got your call today. I'm not going to discuss what you said, but I got your call. Thank you, and I will do what we talked about. So that is good. But thanks for tuning in, and thanks for being my client. I'm glad it all worked out. Got a nice chunk of money coming to you. Um, let's see here. Joe Minnick. What makes sense? I'm an SSD. Medicare's only charging me 20 some dollars. I'm probably not the person to ask about Medicare. It just depends on the Medicare particular issue. So I don't want to comment about Medicare because that's beyond what I know. I'll tell people to call Cal Hero if at MedicareMall.com. He's been very helpful to a lot of my clients. I've interviewed him before, and he might be able to answer that for you. So reach out to Cal, again, Cal at Medicare Mall, or info at MedicareMall.com, and he could probably answer the question about Medicare, because he's really good about that, and he's been very good to my clients, which I appreciate. Laura. Moderate to severe neuroforminal stenosis and scoliosis with a 32% curve, pretty severe. Neurosurgeon says my lumbar spine is a shit show. Uh, that's the technical term for it, folks. If you're wondering, that's the technical term. We don't see that much in records, but when you see that one, you know it's a big problem. But he didn't write that in my notes. I get many procedures done at a pain clinic, and nerve conduction came back normal. Does that kill my back? No, because nerve conduction is only one indicia of a significant problem. You could have a lot of pain without nerve, abnormal nerve conduction study. You could still have some, pain, with spinal cord impingement, or with because of the scoliosis and severe, muscular pain, things like that. I mean, yes, it helps when you've got a positive nerve conduction study or EMG, but it's not essential. Not essential. I think we're still in pretty good shape. Yes, I know. We got like we, as I said, we're in good shape. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable in our case. In fact, because I know you've asked a couple questions the last couple weeks, and I pulled your file, and I go, yeah, we're in pretty good shape. I think we've got a pretty good argument here. So I'm comfortable with that. After approval, does the 827 end? I'm able to keep looking at my medical records. Yeah, I think they expire after a certain amount of time, 6 months or a year, but they can ask for more. Um, but yeah, they'll come to an end at some point. But I don't think it says that it comes to an end after a particular state of an adjudication. I think it comes in after a certain amount of time. And some providers, by the way, will insist on their own medical authorization, or a recent one. So you have to give them another. But if they ask you for one, you got to give it to them. No sitting longer than 30 minutes, no walking without laying down and resting for back surgeries. Yeah, those are limitations. Those are significant. I mean, think about how many jobs, if you go into a job interview and say, I can't sit for more than 30 minutes and I got to lie down for 20 minutes or an hour, and I'm taking 3 unscheduled breaks during the day to lie down, who's going to give you a job? Nobody, right? So I think those are pretty strong there. RIP listed all my symptoms and impairments and how they affect my ability to stand and walk, been consistent with medical identifying testimony. You just may have had a bad judge, low percentage judge, and it's unfortunate, but you probably have to appeal it. Again, there's a local judge here who denies things routinely, and I appeal him, and I must always win because he's full of it and he's wrong, and just has a skewed vision of what it takes to be disabled. Why he's a judge, I couldn't tell you, but that's what he does. So, there are a few outliers out there, unfortunately. Live every Wednesday, not Thursday. I'm Wednesday. This is on Wednesday nights at 8:30. I'm live. And I do record these, and you'll see them on the YouTube channel. And I'm also using pulling clips out of them and putting them up as shorts and other videos, and we're going to try to do more of that. But the actual live is on Wednesday night at 8:30. If you ever want to ask a question, you come in and do so. I'm going to have some guests. I know I've got Spencer Bishens. He reached out to me last week. He wants to come back on. I know Adriana, who's a appellate lawyer. She'll come back on. We've got a bunch of people, so I just need to. I've been really busy the last few weeks, so I just haven't had time to really schedule anybody. But I will definitely get to that. Judge Menard was not reasonable twice, and I've had decent luck with him. Expected to win my hearing from December 17th to elaborate on the question. My first hearing said addresser, and he was not challenged. I think maybe there's no. I think it's not one of the jobs where there is no such thing as an addresser anymore. There are certain jobs that Social Security has identified as being no longer there, and the vocational witness should not use them, and that may be one of them. I don't know. Um, so I don't know if there's any more there, but any more questions here. But um, again, some judges have their, their the way they do things, and some judges don't buy certain medical conditions or don't find you believable, and they deny on that basis. I've again had decent luck with Judge Menard, but some, obviously not everybody does. So that's just it is what it is. I don't think he's an inherently unreasonable person, but for whatever reason, you know, your first case at least, something did not strike him as being believable. Brian Wireman, I'm 32. Had my hearing on February 5th for chronic fatigue, um, hypopituitarism. What should I expect? Um, I think that's a glandular condition that can be pretty significant. What I would do, and I've had cases like this before, especially for a younger person, is I would probably get some materials together from the National Institute of Health, from the Mayo Clinic, and submit those to explain what this means, what this is. Maybe even ask, it's a double-edged sword to ask the judge to call a medical expert. But I think that you need to have your doctor maybe explain what this means in terms of your functioning, that your ability to, your energy level is so low that you are fatigued all the time. You may have to educate the judge a little bit, is what I'm getting at, because at 32, you need to sort of go above and beyond. And having a really strong statement from your doctor, maybe some educational materials, um, that would help. A functional capacity form from the doctor. If it's a listing level, it might be a statement in the listing. I think those are some of the things I would consider looking at doing, because I think it's a serious condition, but you're young. And anybody at 32, big red flag goes up, because really hard to win at 32. And you're going to have to convince the judge, okay, I'm going to put you on disability for the next 30 years. And they're discouraged from doing that. I'm going to tell you. So it is what it is. But yeah, 32 is going to be tough. But I think you've got a serious condition on the other hand, too. Okay, fan cave. Sleep apnea is not fixed even with a CPAP. My AHI is 38 without the CPAP, 54 with. 1% drop in oxygen. Use my CPAP every night, but still have symptoms. I'm not denying that severe sleep apnea can lead to non-restorative sleep. It can make it hard to focus and concentrate. It can lead to longer-term health problems. I've seen a lot of people with AFib associated with sleep apnea. I'm just telling you that in my experience, if you go into a disability hearing and the main impairment is sleep apnea, you're probably not going to win. I'm not giving a value judgment. I'm just telling you that's been my experience. Judges just don't seem to think that sleep apnea can be a disabling condition. I suppose if you had somebody with, a level of sleep apnea that, bordered on cataplexy, where they were just literally, falling asleep all day long, or and cataplexy is a little different story, but a different disease, but essentially functioning like that, where they were just having episodes where they just would fall asleep, during the day repeatedly. And there's evidence to that, maybe, but I've not seen one of those cases. I've never won one on sleep apnea. So I'll see it in a lot of my cases and I'll make it as a factor, but I'm not I just don't think you can rely on it to win. Why does disability examiner overlook mental health and focus on physical? Because it's you can look at an MRI, you can look at an X-ray, a CT, and you can see herniated disc at L4-5, severe back pain with radiculopathy. They match up. Depression, you're relying on what the doctor says, and they're not going to tell you this, but the underlying concern is you're treating with a psychologist or a psychiatrist or both, and you know it's I think even most psychologists and psychiatrists would tell you that severe mental health problems like depression or PTSD or anxiety, they don't get cured, they get managed. And so, the question is, how do we determine that this has been managed enough where this person could return to work? The doctor to some degree has a financial incentive, to continue treating you. Okay, not to say that they don't want you to get better, they do, but they also, see this as a inherently a long-term problem, that you're going to need ongoing treatment and care. And so, from an adjudicator standpoint, they see the treating psychologist or psychiatrist as someone who, is not going to ever say this person is cured. Maybe there are certain conditions that are medically manageable where, they can be, completely non asymptomatic over time. But for the most part, it's a long-term prospect. And so, you know, you're asking an adjudicator who's like an insurance claims adjuster to evaluate a significant medical problem and make a judgment call as to, are they on this part of the line or that part of the line? Are they, not able to work? Or are they able to hold down a simple entry level, warm body kind of job? That's a really hard call for an adjudicator or for a judge. It's just hard. And so it's inherently subjective. You go to psychiatry, and I will tell you, I've seen this. And not that I don't believe that mental health is severe, because I do, but I've seen this happen. I'll see people go to different doctors and they will get different diagnoses. One will call it bipolar, one will call it major depression recurrent without psychotic features, one will call it severe anxiety, general anxiety disorder. A lot of times they're given different names, but making a call about how severe it is really, really hard. So I think the adjusters or the adjudicators are more focused on physical problems because they can be imaged, they can be seen. You can see a disc is either herniated or it's not. But workbook occlusive depression versus you know depression that would leave you limited to a simple entry level job, much more difficult to parse that out. So that's why I think the adjudicators really, it's rare to win a case, mental health case at the initial or recon at the listing level, because unless there is severe problems that the person is basically non-functional, they're going to assume that there is a level of functioning that you could perform, that you've not been, hospitalized 15 times, you've not had 8 suicide attempts. You get to that level that can say, okay, we can see this is a unmanageable, out of control condition. It is non-responsive to medications or treatment, one thing. But, if you're not at that level, hard to draw those lines. Annie Davis, my son met the pulmonary arterial hypertension, very serious condition, listing by showing results from the right heart cath, approved for SSDI in June, CDR is June of 26, need another right heart cath to get approved. Um, I don't want to give you, I think that you need updated evidence to say that his um, arterial hypertension has not improved. Is there another test that is not quite that invasive to make that determination? I would talk to the cardiologist. Um, I would talk to the cardiologist to say, look, he's coming up for a review. What do we need to prove? First of all, is the condition still at its disabling level? And if you believe it is, what do we need to prove that? Maybe the doctor will say you need another right heart cath. Maybe not, but I think those are the questions to ask. It also depends on how old he is. I mean, assuming he's your son, so I'm assuming he's a younger person. 35-year-old, 28-year-old. Maybe you need that extra test. I don't know. I can't really give you an answer. It depends on this is one you got to talk to the doctor about. Is what I'm saying. Um, 4 o'clock lover, 38. If someone applies for SSDI or SSI and gets denied at all levels, the appeal process, how long they have to wait before they can reapply? They can reapply immediately. In other words, you get denied at a hearing on January 14th, you can apply again on January 15th. The problem is that the earliest onset date you can use is the day after um, your most recent denial. Now, you can reopen an initial, so that's not really applicable there, but I mean, in some situations. But let's say it's a hearing, you go to a hearing and you're denied today, you can reapply tomorrow. The problem is they're only going to look at your impairments as of the day, after your last decision. They assume that the decision that you did not appeal or successfully appeal is now what they call res judicata, or a thing decided. Therefore, you cannot go back and revisit something from 2 years ago when that's part of that original decision. The practical issue is if nothing has really changed. So let's say that you applied, 2 years ago, you go through the process, you get a denial, and you got a denial, December 28th of 2025. It's now January 14th of 2026. You reapply. What has changed from December 28th to January 14th? Because that's the earliest onset date you can have. Probably not much. Now, if your age category changed, maybe now you meet a grid rule, or you can fit within the grid rule. So I think it's an uphill battle if you want to reapply right after denial. As long as your date last insured is not an issue, what I tell people, if you can, is try to get a job, try to work. If you can't do it, that's evidence in your favor. A year goes by, maybe there's new medical, something new going on. Maybe your chances are getting a little bit better. But I think if you reapply right away, it's going to be hard to prove there's something brand new that's really disabling. I think it also shows, and again, they're not going to tell you this, but it's going to sort of suggest that you're sort of invested in the idea of being disabled. You're applying one after the other with nothing really changed. I think it's going to be real hard to win. So you have to have something new, something that's going to be significant. And again, in my opinion, make an effort to try to work. That shows good faith that you tried to work. If your age category changes, that can make a difference. And I've won a few of those where I've had people that we've reapplied. And I'll tell you, sometimes I will say as a caveat, I have looked at unfavorable hearing decisions, and I could see that the attorney didn't develop the record properly. There was things that were missing. It was in front of a judge who has since retired, who was a really difficult judge. So that might be a reason why I might say let's go for it right away. But usually I'm going to say let's see what has changed, because that's kind of an important factor there. Danielle Newman, I'm guessing maybe 54. That's helpful. Being over 50 is good. Um, Doctor said the right heart. This is the person whose son has arterial hypertension. The right heart cath is very invasive, having an echo. Um, Again, you got to talk to your doctor. I mean, if you've got support from your doctor, you may not need that invasive catheterization, which I suspect could be dangerous too. If you've got doctors that will go on record to say, nothing significant has changed, the same functional limitations exist, I think that's probably going to be enough. Um, yeah, you've got a lung doctor who's not released him to go back to work. I think that's helpful. I think you'll probably be in pretty good shape. How do you fire a disability lawyer you've not heard from since you started your claim, especially without them grabbing a fee? Um, I think that, these cases obviously take a long time. I would reach out to the lawyer. I would say, what's going on? Um, if you terminate a lawyer, that lawyer can file a fee petition, and they can document all the things they've done, and maybe there's a lot of stuff done behind the scenes. I don't know, but the problem is, I'll just tell you as a practical matter from my perspective, if somebody comes to me, I had a call today. Somebody called and said, I've not heard from my doctor, my lawyer, in a year and a half. I've called, left messages. This is a fairly well-known law firm. I've heard of them before. Not in Georgia, but elsewhere. And they just won't return my phone calls. And I want to fire them. How are you? I said, well, here's the problem is if they file a fee petition, then, or if they say they're not going to waive fees, then they're not going to honor my fee agreement. So I got to file a fee petition. Social Security puts no interest in fee petitions. They just sit out there for years and years. I won't take a case. So I'm going to say to I said to that person, I need the prior attorney to, first of all, I said, you should try to work it out with your existing attorney. You know, I don't like to take cases from other people. I don't want them taking my cases. So try to work it out. Try to call the person, send them a fax, send them an email. Maybe there was some communication issue. Maybe they're trying to reach you and it's going to spam. You don't know, but try to reach them. Or if they will absolutely not respond to you, send them a certified letter saying, if you're not going to respond to me, will you withdraw and waive fees? That will get a phone call. You'll get a phone call from that. And talk to them and just say, look, you're not responding to me, you're not doing anything, and maybe there's nothing to do because the case is just sitting there. But if they're not going to waive fees and withdraw, you're going to have a really hard time getting another lawyer. So I think I would exhaust things with your first lawyer and just see if you can get them to withdraw and waive fees. Then you can go shopping for somebody else. Is the best way I think I can tell you. But I would also say, to be fair, because I know there's a lot of times things going on behind the scenes, and there's nothing really to tell you. Now, again, we use a client portal. We try to let our clients know as things are happening, but there are cases that can go on for months and months. There's nothing really much going on. We're updating the medical, we're doing that, but you don't really see that much going on. But stuff is being done, so don't assume it's not being done. But I definitely would. Reach out, and it may need to be in the form of a certified letter. That way, they will definitely pay attention to it. And if they don't, and again, I don't ever tell anybody to file bar complaints because that's like the nuclear option. But in most states, abandoning a client is an offense. You can't do that. So that would be sort of an absolute last resort. That will get their attention for sure. But if it's just that there's nothing much going on, maybe they've had some staffing turnover or whatever, I would send a certified letter and just be open to talking to them is what I would say. Steve and Cassandra say hello. Once again, thank you for doing your live. Yes. Okay. Well, I don't know if I'm instrumental to the world, but I do what I can. But thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Steve and Cassandra. I appreciate it. Hello. Actually, subscribe to your channel. Good. Thanks, Marie. I appreciate that very much. I've got a bunch of videos in the can. I just got to get time to get them out there. It's just been so crazy busy the last few weeks. I just need to, I got a few days coming up where I can relax, but it's just really, really crazy, which I'm not complaining about, but it's just I can't get to some of the creative stuff because I'm so busy just dealing with kind of day-to-day stuff. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Does SSA provide a full explanation regarding the decision with the conditions I gave the most weight to? At the initial and recon level, generally not. They will talk about the medical evidence they relied upon, but they won't say, we found this condition the most relevant. At a hearing, yes, your hearing decision will say, the judge will say, this is why he found you or she found you disabled. It'll give you specifics. But before the hearing, no. Marie, I've been denied 3 times since her federal court remanded back and a hearing is now waiting. Lawyer requested a change onset date to my 50. Well, again, if your lawyer has a sense that changing your onset date to your 50th will make a difference, then go for that. I think that you want to make life easy for the judges, and I think that changing it to 50 now you have the grid rules that come into play. It may be a strategically wise decision. That's between you and your lawyer, but that's not unheard of, and it could be a very wise decision. A vocational witness says you can't work. And again, that's what you. But realize if the judge asked 5 questions and one of them got no work, doesn't mean the other 4 did. So I've had people say to me, and there's a case I'm working on right now where my client said to me, and another attorney do the hearing, oh, the vocational witness said there's no work I can do. How many questions? Well, there's just 1 question. Well, I got the hearing recording. There were like 5 questions, and one of them was there was no work, but the other 4 or 3 of the 4 where there was work. So, it's sometimes hard to remember exactly what's going on because, a lot of stuff's happening. That's why I always tell my clients, let's get a copy. And I typically download the audio of the decision or of the hearing just so I can have a record of it so I can go back and listen to it. Okay, I found a lawyer to appeal the judge's decision. How long does it take? If you appeal the judge's decision, you go into the appeals council, you're not going to get an approval. You're going to get a remand back to the judge. So the whole process could take a year and a half to 2 years before you get back to the judge and get another decision. So it's not very fast. Not very fast. Does SSA give you a specific CDR time frame, possible their approval, change once they've already had your payment schedule? Um, I don't know. I don't know. I really don't want to speak to that. I don't know how they decide on CDR timeframes, other than they look at the underlying condition and code your file as being one where improvement is likely, possibly likely, or not likely. And the ones not likely are going to be 5 to 7. Likely is going to be 1 year. In between is going to be 3 to 5 years. But I don't know if they change that over time. I just don't know. I don't know. Yes, addresser is obsolete. Goes back to 77. Okay. And again, what I'm getting at is that the Social Security Administration had published a ruling where it said that certain medical conditions are um, inherently stale. They don't exist anymore. A microfiche operator doesn't exist. Surveillance system monitor, they just don't have many of them anymore. And these were conditions that existed back in the 90s. They don't exist anymore. And I will tell you, for many, many years, the surveillance system monitor was a go-to job for a VE who was trying to find a simple entry-level unskilled job. So, an addresser, same sort of thing. I think most people use computers now to do addressing. So they just don't. There was like a whole list of them. I can find that ruling sometime. I found it in the previous episode, but there was a ruling, but there's a bunch of jobs that just don't exist. It doesn't mean that they can't use them. It just means that what the ruling said is the VE, I think it's maybe an emergency message. The VE has to show this job really does exist. As a practical matter, they're saying don't use them anymore. But that's what the ruling said, or the emergency message said. Okay, talked to my examiner, said my paperwork's being held up since September due to work history. I had to clear that up. Had a temp job as a project manager for 12 weeks. Yeah, they're going to want information about earnings because that's inconsistent with being not disabled. And you may have to argue unsuccessful work attempt or, something like that. But, you know, I don't know whether it would hold your paperwork up. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I don't know. Okay, so it looks like you got a couple remands. Usually, by the second time it comes back, it goes to a different judge, which is good. It says it because you're being a manager. This is Karen again. 5 years of not managing, share a call and pick to the phone. Yeah, I think what you do was smart. There was a delay, there was a concern. You called the adjudicator. What is your issue? Well, it looks like you were a manager. Well, really, I wasn't. It was only a temporary position. That way you eliminate maybe transferable skills or maybe it makes the grid rules applicable. So sometimes the paperwork doesn't give the full story. Look, I've seen just in the last couple of weeks, my client's description of the job or time frame, and I look at the earnings record and it's completely different. My client says, "Well, I stopped working X." Well, but the earnings show that you stopped working in 4 months later. Or actually, this one client I was talking to, we have a hearing coming up. She said, "Yeah, I stopped working in 2021. My onset's in 21." I'm like, "Well, your application you used 22 and said you stopped working in April of 2022. I did. Yeah, you did. I'm not being mean about it. It's just didn't remember. But her mind was she was in 2021. All the paperwork said 2022. So in doing a hearing prep, I got to make sure that we are consistent with all that. Okay, we're running out of time. We've got about 5 minutes left here. And again, some of these folks are commenting on some of the other stuff, which is fine. CDR for a 56-year-old being on the roll for over 7 years. Nah, I think that being 56 is going to make it real likely unlikely they're going to do a CDR on you. I've been using AI to edit my complaint and brief to federal court. It is, but you got to be careful because AI is known for what are called hallucinations, and I would not rely on any of the sites that it comes up with. I think it's really tough for a non-lawyer to go to federal court. Look, I don't do federal court work. I have there's lawyers like Brian Konoski or Carl Osterhout, Adriana De La Torre. That's what they do. And if I have a federal court matter, I bring it into somebody's hands. That's what they do. To do it pro se, and to use AI, you're asking for trouble because AI they'll come up with stuff that's not accurate. It's fake because they just make stuff up. Again, the hallucinations, and you don't want to do that in federal court. So, maybe you couldn't find a lawyer to help you, but if you, I would almost tell you not to put citations in there than to use fake ones. But you can use AI to help with the argument, but it's not there yet. I will tell you, I use a lot of AI. I use Notebook LM, which is what they call a RAG, or it's a closed system to do some medical review and to draft some things. But you got to be real careful. It will make mistakes. It will definitely make mistakes. And I've caught them. So I'm real careful about that. Chantet. I'm 50 years old, four-time brain surgery, no pituitary gland, right eye completely blind, left eye central vision, frequent urination. Yes, strong case. Yes, I think that is a pretty good case. You've got significant problems that would cause a real limitation on your capacity to be reliable at any kind of job. Yes, I think that is based on that a strong case. It's amazing what I do. Hope you're taking a zinc. I do take a zinc, and I take vitamin C. Actually got some vitamins. I mean, you can tell I'm fighting a little bit of a cold. I got these vitamin C gummies. But yeah, I started taking zinc and take magnesium. I take a whole bunch of supplements. I don't know if they do any good or not, but I take them. Um, you know, but thank you. Marisol was an SSA medical appointment, Philip education. Okay, I think we talked about that before. Okay. Um, if okay, Christy says, well, if they just let fee petitions wait and sit out there, why not pay them? Because there's no the way, as I understand it, there's nobody. Everything that Social Security employees do is evaluated based on efficiency. They've got to get through a certain amount of this and a certain amount of that, process a certain amount of papers. Fee petitions, there is no metric for. So it doesn't matter if they do one or do 50, they don't get any more credit for it. So since they get no credit for doing them, they just sit out there. And so I've just learned over time, I probably have $50,000 I can't get paid on cases I won. I got one where they sent me half the money. I got the chief judge says, pay the guy's money, won't pay it. I can't. It's unbelievable. So, they're basically saying we're not going to let you do. We're not going to honor fee petitions. We're not going to do it. You know, I'm just I'm so sick of it. I just don't even do them. So somebody calls me, they have a pre-existing attorney. I just say, hey, I'm not going to touch this until you get a S-6096 Sup 2 form, which is a withdrawal and waiver of fees. Won't touch it otherwise. Thank you, Cynthia. I appreciate that. Again, thank you again for the nice review. Um, and I'll put this up here one more time. If you have questions and you want for a case evaluation here. Okay. I'm going to go through. I just got just a couple more minutes. Do you get access to federal remand instructions? Yes, that is part of the order. We do. Absolutely. Happy New Year. There, possible to change the approval after the payment schedule. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Funnies when you're heard as a nut sorter. Yes, surveillance system monitor. A lot of places monitor remotely. Nut sorter was basically like nuts going down an assembly line, and you look for a rotten nut, you know. But microfiche stuff like that. Yeah, those are pretty crazy. And Corleone Sports. Hearing was 15 minutes. The judge approved. Your condition got worse, Mr. Corleone. maybe your last name intimidated him. Maybe he thought that you were related to the Corleones of the Godfather fame. I don't know, but yeah, if you are an oxygen dependent, then you're going to win. I think so. Okay. All right, I think we're about at 2 hours, so I'm going to go ahead and end this now. Again, thank you all for joining me. I really appreciate that. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. You stay warm because it's going to be cold in most of the U.S., certainly in the East Coast. And I really do hope that if you are in the middle of a case, that you get successful, you get positive results, good news. And if you're waiting for a decision, you get a favorable decision. But come back next week if you have any questions, and we'll try to address them. So for now, this is Jonathan Ginsberg signing off. I'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.